Hey everyone, it's Dr. Sebastian Gonzalez with the Performance Play Sports Care Podcast, and this time we're actually doing it video format as well. So I see you see me, and you'll see how these podcasts are basically done. You know, this is the first month that I actually wanted to start doing some type of theme. And for this month, actually, I have it all written down, so we have the next couple of months actually planned out theme-wise of different types of conditions that I would like to highlight. And this month, we're actually going over some lower back conditions, mainly because this is a condition that I actually had, and this is what started me in this whole venture down the sports medicine realm. I remember that if you haven't heard my personal story before, I have it all written up actually onto my website. By the way, if you haven't been on the website yet, it's p2sportscare.com/podcast is where you'll find all these podcasts and anything I talk about or reference on this podcast today. So if you haven't been onto iTunes either, go onto iTunes, look up Performance Play Sports Care Podcast, and you'll find these, and you'll get them weekly. They release every Wednesday. So I thought today I would go into my own personal experience and battles with lower back pain. Next month I'll go into another condition that I've actually dealt with as well, which is a hamstring injury. And then we'll go kind of more along that realm. And I'm going to try to blend in YouTube, Instagram, and all the topics that we're doing around this time of month, or this whole month, and kind of blend them together, because I know I've had a lot of questions on YouTube about, hey, what do you recommend for this X, Y, and Z? Hey, do you have a podcast on this? And I think maybe I'm doing a really poor job at actually blending things together. And so this is my opportunity now to do so. So here we go. Lower back conditions. You are going to actually, during this month, we're going to do a lower back condition. This is my own personal case today. Then we are going into, let me look at my notes, and we're going into lower back anatomy next week. After that, we're going to go into an interview with an industry expert, and then another one with an industry expert. And finally, we're going to go into some integration of how I like to program people in high reward, low risk for back condition rehab. So those are the kind of thought process I'm going to go through on this month, and then we'll go into hamstring conditions. We'll see how this plays out. So if you have any suggestions, good or bad, I want to hear about it, because it's a new thing for me. So one thing about me is, so I grew up playing sports. I played soccer when I was a kid. I played a lot of baseball. I played baseball all the way from I could barely even remember how old I was, and I didn't go into T-ball. So I want to say it was minor B was the one around Southern California here. So I think that puts me around the age of 8 or 9, I think when I went in. So I never really remembered having any major ailment, pain, shoulder, elbow condition. I didn't really pitch much as a kid. I did it every once in a while, but for the most part, I played infield, outfield, no catching. So I was active as a kid overall. We skateboarded, I snowboarded. So we did a lot of stuff, but it's funny when you listen to kids now, you don't really get you hear more injuries. And so thinking back on my first injury, actually, funny story, I was around 15 or so. So I was in high school baseball, and at the time I was still in Boy Scouts. And we went to this event down in San Diego. It was the Camporee or Jubilee, I forget which. But either way, so we were at this event, and when you're around a bunch of other kids, you sometimes get jokes played on you, so which I did. There was a kid that came up and said, hey, do you know the capital of Thailand? And I said, no. And it was actually, the answer was Bangkok, so don't ever answer that one. They hit you in the nuts. So that was actually, no, I take that back. That wasn't actually how my back, I know my back condition started, but that was another bout. That was actually kidney stones. I'm sorry. I have had kidney stones too. But I'll finish that story before I continue forward then. Anyways, my back started hurting from the back part of my back to the groin region. I thought it was because a kid kicked me or punched me, but realistically I had kidney stones around the age of, I think it was 12 or 14 or so. I think that's when we had it. Another story for another time. We're not going to edit any of this out though, so we'll keep it. But anyway, so when I hurt myself in high school playing baseball, it was actually I'm a quicker runner, so usually I like to attempt to beat out infield hits. I try to stretch singles into doubles and so on. That was kind of like my thing. Like I wasn't going to hit for power. I wasn't going to hit home runs. that's just the way it kind of goes. So you just kind of know your place. So, but you do get the opportunity to try to run out ground balls. So I know I hit the ball to the left side, which is shortstop or third base for those of you who don't play a sport with a diamond. So I ran out as hard as I could, and I probably had 1.5 more steps until the base. But in order to make it there before the ball, I had to kind of lean in a little bit, get another longer step, and hit the front part of the base. And I felt just a jolt coming up into my leg, into my back, and immediately it started hurting. So after that, I kind of took myself out, if I recall it correctly. Keep in mind, at this point, it was 20 years ago. Currently, when I have a condition that pops up, I like to write a blog posting about it so I don't forget any of this stuff, or I do a post like this. So basically, I took myself out. And this was, if I can recall, gosh, I feel like it was a point where it was a big chunk of the season. It wasn't the end. It wasn't the beginning. I think it was in the middle. Because this whole thing carried out for another 8 months or so, where I was having back pain. I couldn't hit. We were looking for stress fractures. We were looking for disc herniations. And this whole thing carried out, I remember, until we were playing, I believe we were playing a game in Cerritos, so it was in the summertime because we didn't play them during season. So during the course of my whole first bout of rehab, I started to feel better, but I didn't really get better, if that makes any sense, because I was actually held off of all activity. And I remember looking back at my MRI and CT, and nothing was really that bad. I mean, there was a small herniation around 2 or 3 millimeters. There was no nerve impinged. There was no fracture, which I am thankful, actually. They checked me for a fracture. If you have a kid in sports, especially a rotational sport, you should always check them for a fracture. I think the rough estimation is about half of kids in high school in rotational sports that have back pain, half of them have a stress fracture. And that's a PARS defect is what we call it. So they checked me for that. It was negative. By the way, that condition's often missed. That's why I bring that part up. But for the most part, I was fairly normal. So they kind of kept me out of playing for quite a long time. And I remember I finally got a chance to go back in around that Cerritos game, and it was my first at bat, and I swung the bat, and it was like, oh, okay, that's not normal again. So I went out again. And at the time, I mean, before I'd actually gone to my first bout, I remember I went to a chiropractor first. Maybe not first, but I went to them at some point. He did a lot of lower back, mid back, and neck adjusting, as well as he had a deep tissue therapist there. And remember them really working in my glutes and back and so on. I remember the lady's name was Olga. She would just beat me up for a whole hour. And there was a lot of stem, a lot of ice and things of that nature. I also went to a physical therapist at the time, and I remember the setting of the physical therapist place. It was we started out with a lot of foam rolling, a lot of stretching. The physical therapist really did give me a lot of attention when I was there. So it's not like they were leaving me alone or anything like that. We were getting to the point where we were on this machine that I forget what we called it, but it basically measured the amount of extension strength that I had. It was almost like I was in a chair leaning back against a bar or padded bar that had a computer on it. So that's how they were measuring like the strength of my back. And so it was improving from what I recall, and eventually they did release me, and I think I was there for about 3 months or so. So it was interesting to see that all of that didn't actually decrease the risk of me getting hurt again. And I guess we can still beg the question, was it the same injury, just unrepaired, or was it a new one? I tend to think it was one that was unrepaired, and the rotational aspect that I have not been doing playing baseball, actually, so I started doing it again, and it flared up. I really think there is a need for someone like me, at least in that type of condition, to kind of work in rotational patterns, and we weren't really doing that. And if I recall a lot of the stuff, there are things that I would call, it's what I call passive care, a lot of it anyways. There was a lot of stretching, a lot of foam rolling. There were things that really didn't improve my movements. I I would imagine if I had to take my best guess of what my actual condition was, looking back on the notes that I had, I would say it was probably the disc injury, which was the problem. I didn't have any leg pain. Sure, there was back spasms, but also that happens when the area guards around it. So, and the stress fracture was negative from the CT scan and the MRI. So I just remember it being a very frustrating condition because I, at the time, I think it was the end of my sophomore year, and beginning of my sophomore year, and at the time I was asked to be played up at varsity, which I couldn't do, obviously, so I didn't get to play again until the next year. But it's frustrating knowing that, and I've dealt with a lot of baseball players here now after the fact, and it's funny that you feel that every day, every game, every practice is important. And I remember feeling that. It was just the pressure to get back because you're eventually going to lose your spot, and every year they could cut you. I got my spot back pretty quickly from what I recall, but other people aren't as fortunate. And I remember a kid that I worked with this year. He was kind of fighting for a spot, and he wasn't able to get his spot really back and secure it. So it really termed his season a little bit. It wasn't the same experience that he was going to have. Oops, sorry, I had a little cutout there. I had to. I saw the video stop on the YouTube end. So, but yeah, not everyone's that fortunate. They're not as fortunate to have a spot that's secured, or I guess that's the only way I can put it. But I can tell it was very frustrating. So, I wanted to go on and share my experience today. And I'll probably cut the YouTube off very, very quickly here because we can go even deeper into the podcast. By the way, if you're on YouTube and you're watching this, go find the remainder of this on the podcast. So we'll dive We'll dive a little deeper into the podcast with things that I actually did further to improve myself for the long run. Because as you can see right now, as we stand, if you've read any of my stuff, I don't have any fear right now of playing baseball now. I play every week. I deadlift, I squat, I run, I hike. I do basically anything I want to, unhindered by back pain, and that was 20 years ago. And I'll say this before I actually shut the YouTube video off. By the way, if you haven't subscribed to this channel on YouTube, you really need to. By the way, on the podcast, I guess I'm almost talking to two separate populations here. If you haven't been on if you're on the podcast and you haven't seen a YouTube video yet, there's a ton of the stuff which actionable stuff over there. So search Performance Place Sports Care on YouTube, and you'll find a lot of the stuff. Just subscribe, and you'll end up getting all the stuff that I share visually. But anyway, so the point that I was going to go back with was when my second go around with rehab, it was much better, and the things that I was actually able to do to get proper rehab was I ended up going to a guy who helped me out with a deep tissue work called Active Release, which is extremely helpful. It made me feel better very quickly. But the fact of the matter is, I'm pretty sure I probably moved poorly still. So we strength trained the heck out of my pelvis, my abdominal area, my legs. I remember so I had a stick shift car growing up, and I would drive all the way out about 30 minutes away, and we would strength train, and I would barely be able to drive my car back stick shift wise. And the doctor I had out there his name was Dr. Ron Higuera. I haven't mentioned before on the podcast, but I'm extremely thankful for what he was able to do for me and with me, and his staff as well. And he really got me to go into this profession. It was a lot of his influence that helped me out. So we'll stop the podcast. We'll keep the podcast going, but we'll stop the YouTube video right there. If you guys want to hear the rest of this, go on to the podcast.